My name is Margaret Alvarez. I'm 66 years old. She grabbed the heirloom compass I gave my son and smashed it on the dining room floor like it was nothing. If this upsets you, hit like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. It was December 23rd, 2023, 7:30 in the evening, and my dining room in Portland had never looked more perfect. I'd spent 3 days hand-stitching burgundy napkins with gold thread, arranged a cedar centerpiece I'd carved myself from driftwood my late husband and I collected on our last anniversary trip to the coast. 18 guests filled every chair around the mahogany table that had hosted 4 generations of Christmas Eves in this house. The candles flickered against the windows, and you could smell the rosemary from my herb-crusted hem mixing with the pine bough garland I'd woven along the mantel. Then she did it. My son David's girlfriend Cassandra, this 28-year-old who claimed to have 150,000 TikTok followers, picked up my grandfather's brass compass from the sideboard where I'd placed it next to the family photos. "What's this old junk doing here?" she said, loud enough for every person at that table to hear. "This doesn't match anything." And before I could even process what was happening, she dropped it. Just opened her manicured fingers and let it fall to the hardwood floor with a sickening crack that split the brass casing right down the middle. The room went silent. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. My sister-in-law gasped. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to pause between ticks. I stood there, watching the broken pieces of my family's history scattered on my dining room floor, and I counted the slow seconds as the clock chimed twice. 8:30. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, waiting to see if I would explode, if I would cry, if I would make a scene that would ruin Christmas Eve for everyone. But on the outside, I was perfectly calm. I smoothed my burgundy dress, took a breath that filled my lungs completely, and felt something crystallize inside my chest. A quiet, cold resolve that had been building for months. That compass wasn't just some antique. It was the only thing I had left of my grandfather, Captain James Morrison, who sailed merchant ships across the Pacific for 43 years. He carried that compass through typhoons off the Philippines, through fog so thick near the Alaska coast that he couldn't see his own hands. When he retired in 1954, he pressed it into my father's palm and said, "This will always point you home, no matter how lost you get." My father carried it through Korea. When he came back, he gave it to me, the only daughter, and said the same words his father had said. When David graduated high school and told me he wanted to join the Coast Guard like his great-grandfather, I passed it to him. "This will always point you home." Now it was broken on my floor because some entitled girl thought it was junk. Cassandra had moved into my son's life 8 months earlier. They met at a gallery opening downtown. She was posing next to a sculpture, taking selfies, claiming to be an art influencer who could make or break emerging artists. David was immediately smitten. 26 years old, inheriting my late husband's construction business, and suddenly dazzled by this woman who wore designer clothes and talked about brand partnerships and authentic content creation. In the beginning, I'll admit, she was charming. She complimented my cooking, admired the family photos, even helped me reorganize the kitchen pantry one Sunday afternoon. But there were these small moments that made me pause. She'd suggest different angles when David tried to take pictures of us together. She'd interrupt our conversations to check her phone, holding up one finger like we were supposed to wait while she responded to comments. And she had this way of speaking about David's life, our life, like it was raw material for her next post. The erosion happened slowly, like water wearing down stone. First, she convinced David to let her update our family photos for his social media. Suddenly, pictures that had included me and my late husband were cropped or replaced with shots of just David and Cassandra at trendy restaurants. Then she started modernizing my house without asking. Rearranging furniture, throwing away doilies my mother had crocheted, replacing my ceramic salt and pepper shakers with sleek metal ones she'd ordered online. But the worst part was watching our Saturday tradition disappear. Every Saturday for 5 years since my husband died, David and I would spend the morning in the workshop behind the house, where his father had taught him carpentry. We'd work on small projects together, a birdhouse, a new shelf, repairs around the house. While we talked about the business, about life, about memories of his father. Cassandra convinced him these sessions were limiting his growth and keeping him stuck in the past. Soon, Saturdays became content creation days, where she dragged him to farmers markets and coffee shops to pose for her Instagram stories. Then I started finding the invoices. It began with unusual charges on the business credit card that David had given her for emergencies. $500 at a boutique downtown. $300 for a photography session she claimed was for building her brand. Rideshare receipts for trips across the city when she was supposed to be home. Subscription charges for marketing software, ring lights, designer clothing rental services. When I sat down with the bank statements one quiet Tuesday afternoon, the total made my stomach drop. In 6 months, she'd charged nearly $15,000 to accounts meant for lumber, contractor fees, and employee payroll. I could have confronted David immediately. Part of me wanted to march into his office and slam those statements down on his desk. But I'd learned something in 66 years of life. When people are under someone's spell, facts alone don't wake them up. They need to see the truth demonstrated, not just explained. So I started gathering evidence methodically, quietly. I saved screenshots of her social media posts where she flaunted purchases made with our money, designer handbags, expensive dinners, weekend trips to wine country that she tagged as business meetings with potential collaborators. I requested complete bank statement exports going back 8 months. I even recorded a phone conversation by accident when she called David on speaker while I was visiting the office, detailing her plan to use his family connections to get contracts with other local businesses for her consulting services. Then I decided to host Christmas Eve dinner. I carefully planned the guest list. My sister and brother-in-law who'd known David since he was born, our family attorney Robert Chin who'd handled my husband's will, my dear friend Linda who'd been keeping the books for our business for 12 years, and several other family friends who'd watched David grow up. I told David I wanted to make this Christmas special to introduce Cassandra properly to the extended family. He was delighted. Cassandra saw it as an opportunity to network. I spent a week preparing that dinner. I wanted everything perfect not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because I knew it would be the last family gathering that included her. I cooked my husband's favorite ham recipe. I polished the silver. I arranged those hand-stitched napkins just so. And I placed my grandfather's compass on the sideboard where everyone could see it, right next to the framed photo of my grandfather in his captain's uniform. When she broke it, when she called it junk in front of my entire family, I knew the moment had come. Cassandra, I said, my voice carrying clearly through that silent dining room, before we continue with dessert, I'd like to share something with our guests. I walked to the kitchen and returned with my laptop, opening it on the table where everyone could see. I've been reviewing our business finances recently, and I found some interesting patterns. I clicked play on the video I'd saved from her TikTok account, the one where she showed off a $3,000 handbag while standing in front of David's truck, talking about supporting your partner's dreams and investing in quality. The audio was crystal clear. When your man's family owns a construction business and you finally convince them to let you help with marketing, you celebrate with a little treat for yourself. The room was dead silent. David's face went white. Here's the corresponding charge, I continued, pulling up the bank statement on screen. August 15th. Business credit card. Same amount, same day. I scrolled to the next item. And here's the receipt for your weekend in Napa that you posted about meeting potential clients. I showed the rideshare charges, the hotel bills, the restaurant tabs. The same weekend you told David you were visiting your sick grandmother in Sacramento. Cassandra's carefully applied makeup couldn't hide how quickly the blood drained from her face. Margaret, this is a misunderstanding. Linda, I said, Turning to my friend, "You've been managing our accounts for 12 years. What's the total unauthorized spending over the past 8 months?" Linda cleared her throat. $14,837. I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila envelope. "Robert, you're our attorney. Here are printed copies of all the statements, the screenshots, and the recorded conversation where Cassandra discusses using our family connections for her personal business ventures without our knowledge or consent." I handed him the envelope. "I'd like you to review these and advise us on our options for recovery." Then I picked up my phone and made 3 calls right there at the dinner table. First, to the bank to freeze the business credit cards. Second, to cancel the car insurance on the vehicle we'd been paying for that was registered in her name. Third, to David's office manager to revoke Cassandra's building access effective immediately. "The keys to the house and the truck," I said, holding out my hand. Now, Cassandra's composure finally cracked. "You can't do this to me. David, tell your mother she can't do this." But David wasn't looking at her anymore. He was staring at the laptop screen, scrolling through the evidence, and I watched 26 years of the trust I'd built with my son reassemble itself in real time as he finally saw what had been happening to his family, his business, his life. "Jesus Christ, Cassie," he whispered. "You stole from us. From my dead father's business." The aftermath was swift and devastating for her carefully constructed image. Within days, screenshots of our evidence were making rounds on social media. Other local business owners came forward with stories of her approaching them with collaboration opportunities that were obvious schemes. Her follower count plummeted as people realized her lifestyle was funded by theft. The influencer bubble she'd built around herself popped completely when sponsors started demanding refunds for partnerships they'd paid for based on fabricated metrics. But the real change happened in my son. David returned to the construction sites the next week, working alongside his crews again for the first time in months. He started coming by the house on Sundays to help with repairs and maintenance, staying for dinner afterward. He enrolled in business management courses at the community college, something I'd suggested months earlier that Cassandra had dismissed as unnecessary. Cassandra herself seemed to wake up from whatever delusion she'd been living. She moved back in with her roommate, found a part-time job at a local coffee shop, and slowly started rebuilding her life without the artificial props of stolen money and fabricated success. I heard from Linda that she'd even started paying back the money in small monthly installments, though at her coffee shop wages, it would take her years. The compass, my grandfather's compass, was reparable. I took it to a clockmaker downtown who specialized in antique instruments. He welded the brass casing back together and added a thin gold rim around the crack, not to hide the damage, but to strengthen it. When I picked it up, he'd also engraved a small inscription on the back, "Repaired December 2023, still points home." I gave it back to David 3 months later, on his father's birthday, when he'd proven to me and to himself that he could manage both the business and his own life again. This time, when I pressed it into his hands and repeated my grandfather's words, I added something new. "This will always point you home, no matter how lost you get." And now you know what lost really looks like. David keeps the compass on his office desk now, where he can see it while he reviews contracts and manages employees, and makes the daily decisions that keep his father's legacy alive. Sometimes I catch him running his thumb over that gold-rimmed crack, and I know he's remembering. Not just the pain of being deceived, but the deeper lesson about recognizing when someone sees you as a resource instead of a person. The truth is, I didn't destroy Cassandra's life that night at Christmas Eve dinner. I simply stopped allowing her to destroy ours. There's a difference between being cruel and being clear about boundaries. There's a difference between revenge and refusing to be victimized. And there's a difference between holding a grudge and holding people accountable. What I learned through all of this is that sometimes love means saying no. Sometimes protecting your family means making someone else uncomfortable. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone who's hurting the people you care about is to make it impossible for them to continue. I also learned that dignity isn't something you lose when someone mistreats you, it's something you choose to maintain despite how they behave. The real victory wasn't watching Cassandra face the consequences of her choices. The real victory was watching my son remember who he was before she convinced him to be someone else. People ask me sometimes if I feel bad about how public the confrontation was, if I could have handled it more privately. But here's the thing, she'd made our family business public when she flaunted our money on social media. She'd made my son's life public when she turned him into a prop for her content. She'd made our pain public when she treated our home like her personal shopping mall and our relationships like networking opportunities. What happened at that dinner table was just the truth finally catching up to the lies. I think about my grandfather sometimes, sailing through those Pacific storms with his compass pointing steadily toward home. He weathered typhoons and fog and waves tall as buildings, but he never let go of the one thing that could guide him safely back to shore. That compass wasn't just a navigation tool, it was a reminder that no matter how wild the ocean gets, there's always a direction that leads to safety, to family, to the people who actually matter. That's what boundaries are. They're your internal compass. They point you toward relationships that respect you and away from people who see you as something to be used. They help you navigate between kindness and enabling, between forgiveness and stupidity, between giving someone the benefit of the doubt and letting them take advantage of your good heart. Cassandra taught me that some people will test every boundary you have, not because they're curious about your limits, but because they're looking for places where your defenses are weak. They'll push and probe until they find the spots where you're most vulnerable, and then they'll exploit those weaknesses while convincing you that your discomfort is your problem, not theirs. But here's what she also taught me. When you finally decide to enforce your boundaries, you don't have to apologize for the consequences that follow. You don't have to minimize the damage that was done to make the person who hurt you feel better about facing accountability. And you don't have to pretend that someone's potential for change erases the actual harm they've already caused. The most important thing I want you to understand is this: protecting yourself and your family isn't selfish. Refusing to enable someone's destructive behavior isn't mean. And requiring basic respect in your own home isn't unreasonable. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop making it easy for them to hurt you. I've rebuilt the traditions that Cassandra disrupted. David and I spend Saturday mornings in the workshop again, but now we also talk about business decisions, about recognizing red flags in relationships, about the difference between partnership and exploitation. We've created new traditions too: monthly family meetings where we review finances together, quarterly planning sessions where we set goals for the business and check in on each other's personal lives. The house feels peaceful again. I cook Sunday dinners for people who appreciate them. I display my family photos without worrying about them being updated to fit someone else's aesthetic. I trust the people I let into my home to respect both the space and the memories it holds. Most importantly, I taught my son something his father never had to learn because he never faced this kind of deception: how to tell the difference between someone who loves you and someone who loves what you can provide for them. Real love doesn't require you to diminish your family relationships to prove your commitment. Real love doesn't need access to your bank accounts to feel secure. Real love doesn't ask you to choose between your partner and your integrity. Real love doesn't turn your personal life into content for public consumption. Real love respects your history instead of trying to erase it. Real love adds to your life instead of subtracting from it. Real love sees your family as people to be treasured, not obstacles to be managed. If someone in your life is making you choose between loving them and respecting yourself, they're not offering you love. They're offering you a transaction disguised as a relationship. And here's the hardest truth I learned through all of this: sometimes the people we love most are the least equipped to see when someone is manipulating them. David couldn't see what Cassandra was doing because he was in the middle of it, because she'd carefully constructed a reality where her needs seemed reasonable and my concerns seemed controlling. That's why sometimes you have to be willing to be the bad guy in someone else's story in order to protect them from a worse ending. I don't regret that Christmas Eve dinner. I don't regret the public nature of the confrontation. I don't regret the swift and decisive action I took to protect my family and my late husband's business. What I regret is waiting so long to act, allowing so much damage to accumulate before I finally said enough. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in my story, if someone in your life is slowly eroding your boundaries, disrespecting your values, and treating your family like inconveniences, don't wait for a Christmas Eve moment to address it. Don't wait until they break something irreplaceable to show them that you won't tolerate disrespect in your own home. Your gut knows when someone's intentions don't match their actions. Your heart knows when someone's words don't align with their behavior. Trust those instincts. Protect what matters to you before it gets damaged. Set clear expectations and enforce them consistently. And remember, you don't have to light yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. You don't have to tolerate abuse to prove you're loving. You don't have to sacrifice your peace to maintain someone else's comfort. The compass my grandfather carried across the Pacific, the one my father carried through war, the one I pass to my son, it doesn't just point toward home. It points toward truth. It points toward the people and places and values that actually matter. It points toward safety. Your boundaries are your compass. Let them guide you toward relationships that honor your worth and away from people who see you as something to be consumed. Where are you watching from? Have you ever had to set a boundary that felt harsh but necessary? Have you ever loved someone enough to risk their temporary anger in order to protect them from long-term harm? Hit like if this story resonated with you. Subscribe if you want to hear more about standing up for yourself and your family. Share this with someone who needs to remember that their dignity isn't negotiable and their home should be a sanctuary, not a battlefield. And tell me in the comments, what's the one boundary you know you need to set but haven't yet? What's stopping you from protecting what matters most to you? Remember, you can't control how people react to your boundaries, but you can control whether you enforce them. You can't make someone respect you, but you can refuse to tolerate disrespect. You can't change the past, but you can protect the future. Point yourself toward home. Point yourself toward truth. Point yourself toward the people who see your value and want to add to it, not subtract from it. That compass still works, even with the crack. Sometimes especially because of the crack. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for letting me share what I learned about love and boundaries and the sometimes painful work of protecting what matters most. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. And never apologize for requiring basic respect in your own life.